earned a lot of enmity because of, I mean, let's take the way that he's treated journalists and media in Turkey. He's a democratically elected leader, but he's also behaved in a very autocratic manner, particularly when it comes to media and journalists. So the fact that the army has some support is not surprising.
Mike, what's your interpretation of what we're saying? These are two different shots, okay? Two different moments in time. One incredibly supportive crowd of those soldiers, and one very angry crowd.
Yeah, the problem is, again, you're going to have some military forces that look like some of those were their police, their version of the federal police forces. So you don't know if they've declared that they're with Erdogan or not, and that's the confusing part about these scenes. I'd hate to draw a conclusion without really understanding what they're who these folks are, what they're talking about, what are they chanting. If they're pro-Erdogan, then these folks probably have, the military guys in the vehicles have probably declared that they're there to help support Erdogan.
Right.
If not, then it kind of gives you a whole different feeling that these folks out on the street are anti-government. But it's really hard to tell just given those shots. Even the people who are flying the Turkish flag, does that mean necessarily that they're pro-Erdogan or pro-coup? You don't know, actually.
Right. It's a fair point, General Hertling.
It is a very fair point, and I was watching the faces of the soldiers in that crowd, and you could tell those are some of the younger soldiers. You're talking about the Turkish military is a very professional force for the most part, but they have a yearly recruitment effort. So you're going to have some of the younger forces that might be designated to reinforce the Erdogan protection, where some of the older forces and some of the special forces might be on the side of the coup makers. Not sure yet, and that's the confusion of all this, but the sad thing is they're both wearing the same uniforms. So we're seeing flags being flown in both directions, and again, I'd like to reinforce what Congressman Rogers said, is that the Ataturk doctrine is that the military protects the democracy.
Baby, martial law declared.
It really has to deal with who is in charge of the military at the time and how do they see the democracy continuing on.
Refer to get over here.
And Jim Sciutto is back with us now.
Shut up,
and
bitch.
Jim, obviously President Obama and John Kerry, who has been obviously on the road for the past few days, including in Moscow, have now had a chance to speak.
That's right, and this was the substance of their message. The White House released a statement saying that the President and Secretary agreed that all parties in Turkey should support the democratically elected government of Turkey. So there you have the unequivocal statement from the U.S. supporting the democratically elected current sitting President of Turkey over the coup plotters in a very public statement. Shortly after that, Secretary of State John Kerry released a statement saying that he had spoken to the Turkish foreign minister, emphasizing that same message, the absolute support of the U.S. for Turkey's democratically elected civilian government. So you have the U.S. now saying in public without equivocation, they support the government, not the coup plotters.
Bob Baer?
The problem is Erdogan was trying to destroy democracy. I think it's pretty clear, so we really enter in a difficult position. The army is the protector of democracy. It's been said over and over here. And, what we're seeing is part of the army reacting to Erdogan going after, since 2003, putting all these officers in jail, senior officers, four-star officers, who had nothing to do with the coup, and this was a fake coup. Sledgehammer. So you're seeing a reaction from the military. They were very upset about this. And again, I say that my contacts are telling me that they're unsure that this is going to actually work. And so when I say a colonel's coup, I mean it wasn't the chief of staff that just took over the government. Now, that could very well be wrong. Again, first reports are generally wrong, but this is what I'm hearing out of Ankara.
General Hertling, this is, when we talk about President Erdogan here, though, as I mentioned, a very controversial leader, as all of you have been pointing out, right, in terms of his history, in terms of Turkey's implied tacit support of ISIS, then coming out against ISIS, also an autocratic leader who was building, in violation of all sorts of codes and public opinion, $1 billion something palace, very autocratic. How does all of that play into this?
Well, you add to all those things you just mentioned, Aaron, the fact that he has been pushing down journalists and their right of free speech. He has been back and forth with Russia in terms of how he's supporting them. He has not closed the borders to the extent that NATO would like him to do. And there's been conflict with Israel and a back and forth with Israel. As well as that, he has on his southern border Syria, Iraq, and Iran, as well as all of the Kurdish factors. So other than that, he doesn't have much to do. So he's trying to please all people all the time, and he is somewhat of an autocratic ruler. In fact, a great autocratic ruler. And again, when you talk to the military leaders that in fact I had the honor to speak with, they are extremely professional and want to continue in terms of the culture of the Turkish people. And so there is that conflict there, and they have seen, the military has seen Mr. Erdogan go further and further to the right and away from democratic values. So I think all of that has contributed to the coup. And at the same time he's doing that, there is the perception that he has not been protecting the Turkish people, not only from ISIS, but also from the PKK and the Kurdish influence, as well as dealing with other multinational forces.
So, General Hertling, let me ask you, as we're looking at this, just to explain some of the basics here of NATO. You talk about second largest armed forces in all of NATO, 26 bases across Turkey, obviously crucial ones to the United States and the fight in northern Syria when we talk about Incirlik, but also within NATO. What happens then? Obviously an attack on one is an attack on all. This is an internal coup, but could President Erdogan try to somehow use that to get more specific support from the United States?
Yeah, Mr. Erdogan has attempted to do that in the past, not only with ISIS, but with the PKK. And in fact, there has been multiple discussions about the Commission of Article 5 as Turkey has continued to be under attack by those crossing its borders and by what they see as a terrorist force. So he has gone to the NATO conference in Brussels on multiple occasions and suggested other NATO members help him with internal strife. This is an internal problem that he has. So will he ask NATO for help? He might, but if he does, that's going to be a hard push, because NATO is not concerned with internal conflicts within a country. It's more of a defense against external threats.
Right, which of course this calls into question an unstable Turkey, a threat to all. We have some new video coming in from Ankara that I want to show from the capital of Turkey. This is a video, we'll get it up here in a second, I'll just describe it to you, because I had mentioned a moment ago that an F-16 reportedly shot down a helicopter, and that is ostensibly what we believe you are hearing here. That F-16 jet shooting down a helicopter that the Turkish state broadcaster says was a helicopter that was being used by members of the military who were part of the coup. And that's the explosion that you hear in Ankara. Christian Amanpour is also with us on the phone. Christian, where do you see this going here over the next few hours?
So, Army.
Well, it is
your helicopter is going down, buddy.
Right now, obviously, with President Erdogan having taken to FaceTime to make a live call for his people to come out onto the street. And clearly the pictures that are showing on CNN and around the world are showing that many, many people are coming out onto the street, waving Turkish flags, going into the airport and onto the tarmac and many other places as well. Look, Aaron, President Erdogan, and before that Prime Minister Erdogan, presided over the longest period of history in Turkey with no coups. But before him, from 1960 through to 1971...
Watch your feet, boy. When that shit over. Crunch, crunch, summertime.
In fact, up until 1997, there have been a series of rolling military coups in Turkey. Of course, the United States worked with Turkey all through many of those